Here we go. Good morning, everyone. This is really exciting. This is really fun. It's my first time in the brewery. If you're watching this on video, that's a venue, okay? That's an actual place. Right, so 20 years of BDD. Paul contacted me, Paul Green, one of the organisers, contacted me and said, look, we're doing this PHP UK conference. It's our 20th year. You came up with BDD kind of 20 years ago. I feel like there's a thing there. I said, that sounds like fun. I'm going to, so can you put together a talk about 20 years of BDD, like what you've learned in that 20 years? So I said, that's great. So I put together a 1 hour talk, and then I discovered it's a 30-minute slot. So you can think of this like a Coldplay album being played by the Ramones, okay? So, go. Is this going to work? Hey, come on, buzzer. Hi, I'm Daniel. There we go. Right, so very, very quick bio. About a decade or so as a various types of developer, from graduate and junior through to senior, and just made up like adjectives. Then about 10 years, give or take, working at ThoughtWorks, UK, well, global consultancy, software consultancy, where some really interesting things happened. So that was like the 2000s. And during that decade, you got things like behavior-driven development, continuous delivery, story mapping, version database changes, like database migrations. And again, they didn't invent these things. Lots of other people were doing them. What they did is documented them and spoke about them and gave them names. And luckily, we had Martin Fowler, who's really good at naming things and being loud. And so that worked really well. And then spent 2 years in a trading firm with a proper job, and then consulted myself out of a job. And the last 10 years or so, 12 years, I've been independent. Very important for you to know, I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay, I need you to know this. There's a wonderful, so I'm a big Tim Minchin fan. There's a brilliant, he got an honorary doctorate from University of Western Australia, which is where he did, drama or whatever. And he does this acceptance speech, and it's totally worth looking up, right? But in it, he says this. He says, you don't have to have a dream. Lots of people say, I've got a dream, and I'm going to dream my dream, and I'm living my dream, and it's a journey, and all this kind of stuff. He says, I advocate passionate dedication to the pursuit of short-term goals. Okay, oh, squirrel, that looks interesting. Okay, so that's kind of what I've been doing over the last, 30-something years now. Is I'm micro-ambitious. I look at a thing and I go, oh, that looks fun. I want to get good at that. And so I try it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the thing I want to share with you folks this morning is this, the thing I've learned, if you like. And it sounds really obvious when you use your out loud voice. People work best when there's a shared understanding. Okay, that's the whole talk, right? You can all go and PHP stuff now. Okay, we're done. What do I mean? I mean a shared understanding of the why. Right, so what's the goal? What's the goal? What's the purpose? What's the mission, the thing we're doing? A shared understanding of the what, right? How will we know when we're done? How will we know when we're there? When do we declare victory? Yeah? And a shared understanding that we know we don't know. A shared understanding that we will figure it out as we go, and we trust that we will, because we're good at this, right? So we'll figure this out. And so really what I've been noodling on, if I look back and do a bit of revisionism and say, yeah, I had a plan the whole time, it's this idea of shared understanding. So what does building shared understanding mean? So about the time I was doing this at ThoughtWorks, early 2000s, a brilliant guy called Jeff Patton was exploring, he's a business analyst / UX guy, and he was exploring what's now called story mapping. So he was trying to think of different ways to understand the what, if you like. And he has this gorgeous series of pictures where you've got a bunch of folks that come into a room and they all go, yeah, I'm glad we all agree. And in their heads are very different things, right? And so the start assumption is assume that we don't know that we don't know. Right? If we know that we don't know, then we can start solving things. If we don't know we don't know, we all go, yeah, very confidently, this is fine. So the first thing is to make the implicit explicit. Write down what you think you know, and suddenly you will go, it's a this, and you all look at the board and go, oh. See, I was pretty sure that what I thought was, okay. And then once you've done that, you can start to integrate those ideas. So an awful lot of shared understanding, and this is going to sound crazy, is listening. Right? A lot of shared understanding is empathy, is trying to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Because if you're wrong, you're a mile away and you've got their shoes. Okay? And so then the last part of that is we bring this all together and now we genuinely have a shared understanding, which is fab. So I guess back in the early 2000s, what I was asking myself is, how do I build a shared understanding for a single team? All of the Agile methods that came into Snowbird in 2001 or whatever that created the Agile Manifesto, by and large, they were single team methods. There was, you had XP and Scrum and DSDM and adaptive and feature-driven and a bunch of different methods, and they were all tied on a team scale. And so I was noodling on it, and the thing I came up with is called behavior-driven development, or BDD. So let me give you a whistle-stop tour of BDD. It starts back in 2003, and I was coaching teams, right? And again, shared understanding. The thing I got really excited about at this point was TDD, test-driven development. So who here, the lights on stage are amazing, but I can't see any hands. Put your hands up if you practice TDD. Put your hands up if you practice TDD with other people. Or just on your own? Just on your own in quiet. Okay, brilliant, brilliant. A few hands went up, fantastic. So test-driven development is the best way I know, it's still the best way I know to design in the small. Okay, it's not about testing. The first thing I ever published was in 2004 called Test-Driven Development is Not About Testing. And they came for me with pitchforks. They didn't even read the title. So, but anyway, so I'm trying to teach TDD to teams, and programmers are saying, well, we're not going to write tests. We have minions to write tests. We have testers. And then you go and talk to the testers, and they go, don't let programmers write tests. They have no idea what they're doing. And so I was like, but this isn't about testing. So I thought, I'm going to try something. I'm going to try teaching TDD without using the word test at all. So I talked about code examples and executable specification and writing model clients and all, and it just worked, right? It was an experiment, it just worked. And suddenly all these teams were going, of course we need a spec, but normally it'd be like a Word document. You know, these days it'd be Jira. And no, we're going to write it in Java code. We're going to write it in whatever language we're using. And this landed really well, and it was really exciting. So I started writing a little bit of open source in Java back in 2003. I registered the domain name jbehave.org the day before Christmas Eve, 2003, much to my wife's dismay. We're in South Africa, she's South African, we're in South Africa visiting family. What am I doing? Registering domain names. They're all out there doing South African stuff. And this is something, the wonderful Chris Matz came up with this observation. He said, anyone can be an innovator. Anyone can have ideas. That's not the point. The most valuable person in a new thing is not the person who comes up with it. It's what he calls the first follower. The first follower creates the community. And in my case, the first follower was this amazing lady, Liz Keogh. So she was at ThoughtWorks at the time. I did an internal meetup thing, described BDD, and she got it straight away. And she went, this is amazing. We should do something. So we worked on JBehave together. 2004, things get interesting. So 2004, we're writing stories on index cards. And we just have the story title, get money out of an ATM or something. And then this guy, Ivan Moore, said, well, if you turn it over and put a line down the middle on the back, you can put the acceptance criteria. I do this, this happens. Okay? And we're like, that's pretty cool. And the brilliant thing about I do this, this happens, on an index card, on a 3x5-inch index card, is you can't write very much. Okay, so that necessarily constrains you, yeah. And so I was excited about this. I thought this feels like it's part of BDD, but I'm not sure how. And then I was in the ThoughtWorks office in London talking to Chris Matz, who's a business analyst / finance kind of risk massive brain. And I was describing BDD to him. And I said, you start with an example, an executable example, and then you make the code be true. And he said, you're describing analysis. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, basically what we do is we come up with what we want to be true, and then you lot go off and write it until it's true. And we both went, whoa. And so he said, the problem with I do this and this happens is this. He said, as an analyst, I do this, anything could happen, right? Because I do this is entirely dependent on context. So then we said, we need a third column. So given some context, when I do this, then this happens. When I try and get money out of an ATM, given I've got money in my account, I get money. Given I'm overdrawn, then I don't get money, right? And so you could get these, and so we went, ooh. So immediately I went squirreling back to JBehave and put in scenarios and steps and that structure. To me, it seemed like a really nice kind of way to structure things. And that was cool. And this was also the year I started speaking at conferences. I spoke at my first conferences in 2004 at the precursor to Agile, called ADC, Agile Developers Conference, and the precursor to GoTo, which is called Yo, if you're Danish, or Jiao, if you're not. So in 2005, something interesting happened. A chap called Dave Astells had been working at ThoughtWorks for a bit, and I spoke to him, and he went, oh, this is really cool, and went and wrote an article about BDD. And then this chap called Stephen Baker said, do you know what? Ruby is a really good language for expressing this stuff. So in Ruby, I don't know if any of you PHP folks have used Ruby. How many PHP folks have used Ruby? A few of you, a handful. OK. I'd like to see the intersection of that community, because all the Ruby people I know are lovely, and all the PHP people I know are lovely. The Rails people, bit odd, right? But the Ruby people and the PHP people, all lovely, right? So anyway, this chap, Stephen, says, I think we could come up with a really nice DSL in Ruby that sort of describes this. And so RSpec was born. So the following year, I publish Introducing BDD, which is like the article describing all of this stuff. It gets published in a magazine called Better Software, and started to get some more traction now. And then in 2007, loads of stuff happened. So 2007, I'm looking at RSpec, and I'm thinking what I want, because I like the sort of terseness of Ruby, the lack of syntax. It's a very light syntax language. And I didn't really know much about Python at that point. So I'm like, OK, if I were going to write a step runner, like a scenario runner, in Ruby, what would it look like? So I wrote a thing called RBehave. And that was my attempt. And if you Google, or sorry, DuckDuckGo, if you don't use Google, if you search for Introducing RBehave, there's a whole article with like example code and stuff. And it was fab. It looked really good. I was very pleased with it. And I showed it to the RSpec folks. And this guy, David Chilimsky, who was running the RSpec project by then, said, this is great. Just integrated it into RSpec like overnight. It was amazing. And so then, while he was mucking around with this, so RSpec, even though Ruby has a very terse kind of language, if you like, terse syntax, what I had in my RBehave runner is you could add an observer and it would spit out the steps as you went along. So you got this kind of self-documenting tests, which were nice. And he said, what if you turned it around and had the plain text as the input? Then non-programmers could start writing this stuff. And I was like, still not convinced. 25 years later, still not convinced. But so then he blogs plain text stories in RSpec, right? And that was really cool, except it had my shonky code in there. So what I've discovered, my main contribution to open source over the decades is to write stuff that's so bad that someone needs to rewrite it. So JBehave I wrote, and I made it so bad. I introduced visitors. I was obsessing with design patterns in the early 2000s, and I introduced a visitor pattern, which is always a bad idea, because that's just code for way over-engineered. So I way over-engineered it. Liz Keogh rescued me, said, right, we're going to create JBehave 2.0. She rewrote it. She was brilliant. Likewise, this chap, Aslak Hellesøy, who's Norwegian, said, why don't we just rewrite this with a proper grammar, not least because I'm Norwegian, and so I want to have plain text stories in Norwegian. So if we have a nice simple grammar, then you can just project that grammar into different languages. And so like there's now kind of 70-something, or I don't know, a bunch of languages that you can use in Cucumber. And the cool thing that happened with Cucumber is they abstracted this kind of given, when, then scenario kind of very lightweight thing into its own grammar, called Gherkin, because that's what happens when you pickle cucumber, get it, right? And suddenly there was this Cambrian explosion of frameworks in different languages. So the .NET folks said, oh, cucumber in C#. And a wonderful chap called Konstantin said, oh, cucumber, but in PHP. And that's behat. And I'm pretty sure there's some behat folks here. Like behat still, all of these things are still going, which is cool. SpecFlow got killed off, but has now been reborn as Reqnroll, which I think is a great name. Serenity sort of is rumbling along somewhere. But suddenly there was this like amazing Cambrian explosion, which was cool. Meanwhile, some folks are writing books, right? Now, the main thing that all of these books have in common is I didn't write any of them. I have an and here. Look, there's an and Dan North. You see that? That is a chapter. I wrote a chapter of one book. Yeah. And this was what was exciting for me, because this is all happening over like a 10-year period or something, right? And the point was, and it got its own conference. Right, BDD had its, like this idea I had, this hack I did like some time before, suddenly had its own proper conference with Skills Matter. And again, if you look at the headline, Gojko Ajic is headlining this, who wrote a couple of those books, right? I'm not even speaking at this one. I did speak at a few of them, but I'm not even at this one. And that was the brilliant thing, right? For me, BDD is its community. I love that BDD is its community. I'm just this guy. I'm just this, friendly old beardy guy off to the side. And I had no idea that your password for the conference is going to be community. Right, but I love that. And so, if any group of people is going to understand that BDD is its community, it's the PHP folks, right? And what I love, one of my favorite descriptions of PHP is like, it's an amazing community, it's an amazing ecosystem. The only thing that's wrong with PHP is the language, right? Everything else is incredible. I'm sure you've heard that before. Anyway, so let's roll forward 10 years. And where's my head been? Well, my head has been kind of panning back, right? Let's ask the same question. How do you build shared understanding, but for a team of teams? Yeah? How do you build a shared understanding for a team of teams? And that led me to a thing that I call demand-led planning. Demand-led planning, I'm going to try and describe demand-led planning in 5 minutes, right? This is the Ramones version, okay? Demand-led planning was this, is I'm scratching my head. The way we mostly do teams, who's working with like bigger than a team bunch of people? All right? Who's working in just a team and we get on with it, thanks? And that's fine. Who's just not going to put their hand up because they're at a conference and feeling a bit awkward? Yeah, brilliant. So the problem we have is this. When it's a single team and a single backlog or requirements or need or product or whatever, just do what you like, do whatever works, yeah? The problem happens when you have a pile of demand, a pile of work that's bigger that won't fit into teams, okay? And then out the back of that, I want to get some value for some value of value. We don't really, defining value is really hard. But that leaves us with two problems, right? The first problem is how do I split the work up into a bunch of teams? And the second problem, which is much harder, is how do I then integrate this work out the back to turn it into a thing, right? And it struck me that like if you look at any scaling method, safe, less, DAD, whatever, disciplined agile, Scrum of Scrums, all the Scrum at scale or whatever, all these different things all assume one thing. They assume stable, long-lived feature teams, or stable, long-lived Scrum teams is another name I've heard. So, and this got me thinking. Right? I started poking at this because I like to poke at things. And the first thing I poked at was, right, what's the presupposition? If you're going to build your house on the sand, on the foundation of stable, long-lived feature teams, let's explore that. Why do we believe that to be true? Well, long-lived is true because of a chap called Bruce Tuckman. Bruce Tuckman did a study in the 70s. And he coined this term, this idea of forming, storming, norming, and performing. Who's heard of these things, right? And who also heard that these things take time, and you talk about teams gelling, and then you take, you don't want to keep on mucking around with teams because these things take time. Turns out, when you kind of look behind the curtain, there's nothing there. Bruce Tuckman did not do this research. Bruce Tuckman read other people's research. This is called a meta-study. So he looked at other people's stuff, and he said, there's a pattern here. And the studies were not teams with a mission, with da-da-da-da-da. They were groups of people in therapy, okay? Most of the groups that he studied were groups of people in therapy. So these people come together, and they've all got, they're being vulnerable, and they might have, a drug thing or an alcohol thing or whatever it is, right? They're in therapy, group therapy for some reason. And so clearly it takes a bunch of time before you're going to be vulnerable with a bunch of complete strangers, right? And so anyway, then you look at this, and there's been a load of research much more recently that says it's rubbish. It's rubbish. You can do forming, storming, and norming. They all happen, but they can all happen concurrently, and they can all happen very, very quickly. So you can throw together, and again, at ThoughtWorks, I experienced this again and again as a consultant. You get thrown into a new team at a new client, and some of you have never met before. You might know each other off mail lists or whatever. But all you do know is we were hired by the same company. So we've been through the same recruitment process. The bar's pretty high, right? If you're a tester, if you're a ThoughtWorks tester, you're pretty good at this. If you're a ThoughtWorks developer, you're pretty good at this. So I knew if I got a bunch of people together that the quality bar's there. We had a shared mission, solve this for the client, right? We've got typically a deadline, and we would all just get on with it. And we would be a high-performing team within probably days, right? Usually less than days. And I experienced it again and again and again. It wasn't a fluke. And other people did as well. And so, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's look at feature teams then. Well, not everything is features. I'm going to look at that in a minute. So if you assume that there's feature teams, then you try and slice everything up as features. What if they aren't features? What if there's all kinds of different types of work? And we now see team topologies and all of that stuff that Matt Skelton and Manuel Pays have been doing. And then the stable piece, well, that assumes that my work is homogeneous, right? All the teams can kind of do similar stuff. And that my work is homogeneous over time, right? I don't need to change things over time. What if that's not true? I was like, oh, if we just assume teams, assume a bunch of people, what if we started at the other side? What if we started on the demand side rather than the supply side? That'd be interesting. And so I looked at different types of demand. Delivery, clearly, is a type of demand. That's the one we normally obsess over. Features, enhancements, user-visible stuff, okay? And that's our backlog. If you look at our backlog, it's almost always that. But then you get discovery. And discovery in most agile methods, in most software methods these days, is a second-class thing. It's either done in parallel. You know, we have a dual track where we've got the discovery stuff going along, kind of front-running the delivery stuff and whatever. Or it just gets squeezed in the edges, or we don't talk about it, you know. UX people, again, second-class citizens, designers, second-class citizens, user research, all of that stuff. What if we make that first-class work? What if we say experiments are first-class work? And not just researching user behavior, but researching the domain. If I'm in healthcare, I need to learn the domain of healthcare. That's first-class work. And the technology stack I'm going to use. You know, I'm looking at the arc of PHP, and it starts personal homepage. That was the original PHP. And then you look at the vast majority of most people's web experiences, either Facebook, which is PHP, or WordPress blogs, which is PHP. So you won. Right? It is most people's personal homepage, unless they're like really old and still on Yahoo, which is PHP, right? So it's everywhere. Yeah, it's like the Japanese knotweed of languages. And so the third thing then is all the other stuff. And again, all the other stuff are known as KTLO, keeping the lights on. So all of our scheduled business as usual, BAU, reporting, what's called failure demand, which is responding to things that shouldn't have happened, right? Outages. Any Kaizen work. So generally people think of Kaizen as just process improvement, but I broaden it to anything that changes the system of work. So any tech debt, any tech cleanup work is Kaizen. Learning and development is changing the skill set, changing the profile of the team, right? So that is first-class work. So if we start with all of that, then we get everyone in a room. Then the first thing we do is identify the demand. Second thing is then various people pitch the demand, right? I want to do this, I want to do this. And they're not just pitching features, they're pitching internal cleanup work or whatever it is, maybe regulatory work. We set constraints, so like teams no fewer than 3, otherwise you're always in meetings, no more than 10 because you get in each other's way. All the skills in the team necessary to do the work might be a constraint. We might say, so these sorts of things, yeah? And then everyone just runs around, right? Select into wherever you're going to be. And this couldn't possibly work, right, until it does. And then you just test. You say, right, do we have, well, there's way more than 10 over there. There's only one lonely person over here. Let's reconfigure. So you iterate, repeat until you get to something that looks like it's going to work, okay? And it looks a bit like this. So you have all these folks around the edge, these kind of sponsors, these people pitching their work, and everyone's standing in the middle and listening. And then they all go off, and then someone's pitching feature 1 over here, and then enhancement number 2 over here. Please someone come and help me do this report. It's got to go out. And so then the people self-select into the work, and it's really exciting. So then what? So then we use OKRs for goals. We use flow metrics for tracking. What are flow metrics? There's 3 flow metrics, 3 throughput accounting metrics. The first thing is throughput. Throughput is how much stuff did you get done? You define what stuff is. Okay, I don't mind, I trust you, yeah? So how many items, whatever they are, business change items, features, tickets, blah, whatever, how many of those did you do in the last couple of weeks? How old on average are they? Because the lead time is the time from commitment, I will do this thing until you get it. And when you first start doing this, the numbers are eye-wateringly bad. Okay, they're super embarrassing. So most teams I'm on, lead time is anything from 2 weeks to 14 months. Someone asked for this over a year ago. and has since left the company, right? And they want this at their new job. And then work in process is how much stuff is the team working on right now? Because that's your lever, right? If we're working on too much stuff, none of it's moving forward. So we want to be working on just enough stuff that all of it's moving, which is generally 1 or 2 things, not 10 or 11 things that we say, oh yeah, 10 or 11 things are in progress, means no things are in progress, okay? So these are my levers. So that's demand-led planning, and that's about 10 years ago. So what does 20 years on look like? Pan back, pan back, pan back. How do you build shared understanding for the whole organization, right? Ooh. So that's a different thing. That's a thing that I'm calling autonomy through alignment. So autonomy through alignment, in 5 minutes, is this. We need alignment of a bunch of things. We've got to align our product vision, right? So what is the thing we're building? Who's the customer we're serving? Whose day are we making better? Technology vision. What will it look like when it grows up? TDD, BDD are fantastic in the small, but they need to be inside of a larger kind of piece. So we need to know what we're moving towards. Ways of working, what does good look like around here? How do we do stuff? And focus, what's in scope for the next bunch of time? Who owns these? We have product leadership, we have technology leadership, we have practices or guilds or ways of connecting people laterally in the organization. And then we have delivery leaders at various levels, team, program, whatever it might be. And how do they do this? They share it through things like product strategy, things like technology strategy. Ways of working you share through communities, right? This is a community. And again, OKRs, I'm a huge fan of OKRs. Come and talk to me when they're done well. And so now, if you squint, you basically get the middle bit is kind of structure, and the bit on the right is kind of direction, right? And so that's what I do now. This is what I've been working on. I've called this thing Goalwards. Goalwards is so Goalwards. I'll tell you the story of Goalwards so far is it has a really cool logo. There we go. I've solved most of it, right? It's got a logo. It's in flight. But okay, so what's next then? Where do we go next? What's next for BDD? I love BDD. I still love BDD. It's a really vibrant community. Everyone in the community is nice, right? You will recognize that energy, yeah? It's a centered community, not a bounded community. I could go into a huge amount of detail about this. What it means is this. There is a thing that we consider good looks like in BDD, right? BDD is about, are all of the people in the team facing the same way? That's the whole question, right? So the 3 amigos thing came out of BDD. I didn't come up with that. Example mapping came out of BDD. I didn't come up with that. That was some other folks. That was Matt Wynn and Seb Rose. And so loads and loads of different techniques and things have emerged, tools have emerged over the years about how do we do this? How do we get everyone pointed in the same direction? It's not are you inside the tent? Are you BDD or not? Right? Which is like with something like Scrum, do you have the certificate? Have you done the training? Can you call yourself a certified or professional? I love that you can either be certified or professional, but not both. Right? And it's not for sale. And what I mean by not for sale isn't we haven't tried to sell it, right? Is like Smart Bear acquired Cucumber and then went, can't figure out how to monetize this and just got rid of it. Luckily, the Cucumber folks managed to get the brand back and the domain and stuff. Tricentis recently bought SpecFlow, the team that does SpecFlow, owned the IP and then killed it. We can't make money off this, but they won't give it back. And that's why SpecFlow is now called Reqnroll. It's ridiculous. So it turns out it's really hard to monetize helping people point the same way, right? It doesn't fit into a nice, neat certification framework, and I'm delighted about that. What's next for Goalwards? I don't know. It's taking shape. It's really exciting. Watch this space, right? What's next for me? I'm still exploring. I'm still exploring this. I'm still exploring how do you get shared understanding? How do you get people pointing in the same direction? So I guess with about a minute remaining, the question really is what's next for you, right? What do you want to get out of today? What do you want to get out of this conference? What do you want to get out of this being amongst, kindred spirits, right? Absolutely make the most of today. And the connections you make today, stay in touch with those people and have a brilliant, brilliant conference. And thank you very much.